The late afternoon sun stretched low across the endless plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that bled into the rugged horizon. Clara's heart pounded with a mixture of dread and disbelief as she sat upright in the back of the rickety wagon, the wheels crunching along the uneven dirt road. At 19, she had imagined a life filled with choices, however small, dreams that belonged solely to her. Yet now, as she rode toward the humble farmhouse that would become her home, she realized those illusions had been swept away in a single, unyielding act. Her marriage to Samuel, a man whose face she barely remembered from a passing visit to town. Her parents' eyes had been cold with determination, their whispers laden with the finality of necessity. He's honest. He works hard. That's all a girl needs. And so she had been packed away like a parcel, her fate sealed with the weight of frontier pragmatism. The journey had been quiet, save for the occasional clip-clop of the horses and the faint whistle of the wind through the dry grass. Clara's hands rested in her lap, clutching the edges of her skirt, fingers trembling slightly as the reality of the life awaiting her settled in. She tried to think of Samuel as a man of kindness and integrity, but her imagination refused to cooperate, conjuring instead all the possibilities of discomfort, awkwardness, and fear. She glanced at the passing landscape, barren yet beautiful, dotted with clusters of scrubby trees and the skeletal remains of old fence posts. The land seemed unyielding, much like the world she was being thrust into, a place where strength was demanded and sentimentality punished. And yet in that harshness there was a quiet, stubborn beauty, a resilience that spoke to the survival instinct of those who called this frontier home. Finally, the wagon came to a slow halt before the farmhouse. Clara's eyes widened as she took in the sight. A modest wooden structure, weathered by sun, wind, and the occasional storm, yet standing firmly as though defiantly resisting the passage of time. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the comforting aroma of bread baking over the fire, mingled with the earthiness of livestock and the faint tang of hay. There was no grandeur here, no opulence, only the tangible marks of a life built from sweat and perseverance. Samuel emerged from the doorway, a figure both strong and quiet, his workman's hands tucked casually into the pockets of his rough-spun shirt. His gaze fell upon her steady and unflinching, as though he had been waiting patiently for this moment his entire life. Clara dismounted the wagon, her boots scuffing against the dusty ground, and felt a rush of nerves. Samuel approached her with careful steps, each movement measured yet calm. He did not rush her, did not speak in hollow pleasantries. Instead, he offered her a simple nod and a faint, almost imperceptible smile that carried with it the promise of patience and understanding. She was struck by the unexpected gentleness in his demeanor, a stark contrast to the harshness she had anticipated from a man raised on the demands of frontier survival. For a moment fear mingled with curiosity, stirring a dissonant rhythm in her chest that neither she nor Samuel seemed in a hurry to define. The farmhouse interior was warm, a soft glow from the hearth casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Clara's eyes roamed the small, simple room that would be hers, absorbing every detail: the narrow bed with its hand-stitched quilt, the small dresser polished to a muted sheen, and the window that framed the vast open prairie stretching beyond. Each object spoke of a life measured by necessity and care rather than indulgence. Samuel followed her silently, respecting her space while subtly asserting his presence, a constant yet unobtrusive reminder that she was not alone. She felt both comforted and unnerved by his closeness, unsure whether the fluttering in her chest was fear, excitement, or something entirely different. Dinner was served in the main room, a humble affair consisting of cornbread, roasted meat, and boiled vegetables. Yet the simplicity of the meal did not diminish its warmth. Clara noticed how Samuel's hands, though calloused and worn from labor, moved with a careful precision that spoke of pride in his work. He offered her a seat and waited for her to begin, his eyes never leaving her face, patient and observant. Conversation was sparse, polite, and cautious, each word measured as though testing the waters of this new and delicate relationship. Clara found herself studying him in return, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders, the faint scars on his knuckles, and the quiet steadiness that seemed to anchor the very room. There was a dignity to him that defied the roughness of his exterior, a sense that beneath the surface lay a man capable of deep thought, empathy, and perhaps even tenderness. As the meal progressed, Clara's initial trepidation began to shift, Replaced by a hesitant curiosity, Samuel spoke of simple things: the land, the crops, the weather. Yet even these mundane topics carried a weight of meaning. He revealed glimpses of his character through the stories of his labor, his respect for the earth, and his commitment to doing right by the people and animals dependent on him. Clara felt an unfamiliar stirring within her, a sense of possibility that this new life might hold more than she had dared imagine. The silence between words was not uncomfortable. Rather, it was filled with the unspoken negotiation of trust, a tentative dance of recognition and understanding. After dinner, Samuel guided Clara to the main room, where the fire had burned low, leaving only embers that glowed like tiny sparks of anticipation. He spoke softly, not with the authority of a man commanding obedience, but with the quiet firmness of someone who understood the gravity of this night. He told her that there were no rules here she must fear, no expectations beyond mutual respect and the willingness to take a step into the unknown together. His words, gentle yet unwavering, seemed to strip away the weight of convention, revealing a space where fear might be met with patience and uncertainty with care. Clara felt her chest loosen, a small measure of relief mingling with the persistent thrill of curiosity. The night deepened, and the farmhouse settled into a serene stillness, broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards and the distant call of a nightbird. Clara lay in her modest bed, the quilt drawn around her shoulders, listening to the steady rhythm of Samuel moving about the room. There was a quiet intimacy in the ordinary sounds of a home, a recognition that life, even on the frontier, could hold moments of profound connection without grand gestures or declarations. Her mind wandered, imagining the days and nights to come, wondering how much of her old life she would leave behind and how much of herself she could preserve. Clara realized, as she stared out the window at the stars scattered across the prairie sky, that this night would mark the beginning of a journey far more complex than she had anticipated. Samuel's presence was not overbearing, nor was it absent. It was a constant grounding force that demanded nothing yet offered everything that mattered: patience, respect, and the quiet possibility of something resembling love. She felt a cautious hope stirring within her, an awareness that the rules of the frontier, harsh as they were, might be bent, reshaped, or even broken in the presence of a man who understood the value of kindness and trust. In the stillness of the night, Clara drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams mingling fear with anticipation, doubt with desire. The farmhouse, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight, seemed to hold its breath alongside her, a silent witness to the fragile beginnings of a life being forged in the crucible of necessity, resilience, and unexpected tenderness. Here, on the edge of civilization amid the dust and the open sky, Clara understood that the journey ahead would test her in ways she could not yet foresee. But perhaps, just perhaps, it would also reveal the depth of courage, trust, and connection that lay waiting within her own heart. The farmhouse was quiet now, the day's labor and movement reduced to the gentle sigh of wind against the wooden walls and the faint creaking of the floorboards, settling under the weight of the night. Clara lay in her small bed, her hands clenched in the quilt, her heart still thrumming with the echo of uncertainty from the evening. She could feel the tension of her new life in every muscle, in the tightness of her shoulders and the restless flutter in her chest. At 19, she had imagined many things about marriage, some sweet, some romantic, but she had never considered that her first night might demand courage of a very different sort. Courage to face not just the unknown of a husband's touch, but the unprecedented kindness and care that could accompany it. Samuel entered the room quietly, his boots muffled by the rough woolen rug that covered the worn floorboards. There was no hurry in his movements, no abruptness that might startle her further. Instead, he carried himself with a deliberate calm, the kind of steadiness that only a man intimately familiar with hardship could possess. He did not approach her bed immediately, nor did he speak in commanding tones. Instead, he sat on the edge of the wooden chair by the window, his silhouette outlined against the pale moonlight that filtered in through the glass. The shadow seemed to bend gently around him, softening the sternness of his strong features, and Clara found herself studying him with a mixture of awe and fear. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Samuel simply watched her, his gaze steady but gentle, as if trying to convey the reassurance that his presence alone could provide. Clara's mind raced, imagining all the ways a man on the frontier might assert his authority on a wife's first night, some rough, some indifferent, many selfish. But Samuel's expression, calm and attentive, betrayed none of those expectations. Instead, it held patience, an almost revolutionary tenderness, a silent vow that he would not harm her, that he would not rush her, that he would allow her the dignity to remain herself. Clara felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest at the realization that this man, this stranger-turned-husband, intended to honor her in ways that defied every hardened rule she had been taught about frontier life. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice low, steady, and deliberate. "You need not fear me tonight," he said. "Nothing will happen that you do not wish. We will take this one moment at a time together." His words were simple, yet in them lay a weight of respect that Clara had never imagined a husband might extend. The frontier, she had been told countless times, was a place of necessity, survival, and strict social codes, codes that rarely allowed for such patience or consideration. And yet here he was, quietly dismantling those rules, bending tradition in a way that felt both revolutionary and profoundly intimate. Clara felt the pull of curiosity against the backdrop of fear. She rose slowly from the bed, clutching the quilt around her as if it were a shield. Samuel did not reach for her, did not command her to approach. He simply remained where he sat, allowing her to make the choice herself. Every step she took toward him felt deliberate, loaded with unspoken questions and cautious trust. Her eyes met his, and in them she saw not lust nor impatience, but a quiet insistence that her feelings, her boundaries, her very self, mattered. That realization alone unsettled her, stirring an unfamiliar and almost dizzying awareness that she could be seen, truly seen, and yet remain safe. He rose then slowly, moving toward her with measured steps, each movement betraying both strength and care. Samuel's hands were gentle when they reached for her, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, tracing the line of her jaw with a lightness that defied the harshness of the world outside. Clara shivered at the contact, not from fear but from the unprecedented tenderness in his touch, a softness that seemed almost forbidden on the frontier. It was a language she had never encountered, one that spoke of protection, respect, and a desire to honor her rather than possess her. Her breath quickened and she felt herself trembling, caught between fear and a growing trust she could not yet name. The night stretched on, measured not by minutes or hours, but by the careful exploration of each other's presence. Samuel did not rush her into closeness. He guided her with quiet patience, encouraging her to speak, to express her thoughts and fears, to take the lead in their shared experience. Each gesture was deliberate, each touch considerate, defying the brutal expectations she had been taught to anticipate. Clara discovered that the frontier rules, which dictated that a husband's desires took precedence over a wife's comfort, could be rewritten, bent into something humane, even tender. And in that bending, in the deliberate respect and gentle care, she felt the stirrings of an intimacy unlike anything she had imagined, an intimacy built on trust rather than compliance. Samuel's hands were steady as they guided her to the small chair by the window, encouraging her to sit while he knelt in front of her. His gaze met hers, unflinching and yet not demanding. "Tell me what you want," he whispered. And for the first time in her life, Clara realized that her desires, her comfort, and her autonomy mattered in a way that was revolutionary. Her voice was soft at first, hesitant, yet Samuel's calm presence allowed her to continue, to articulate feelings she had never dared acknowledge, fears she had carried silently since childhood. The night became a dance of words, glances, and careful touches, each interaction a quiet rebellion against the harsh codes of the frontier, each moment an affirmation of her humanity. Time became fluid. The outside world, with its unforgiving sun, dusty trails, and relentless expectations, faded into irrelevance. In the stillness of that small room, Clara experienced a sense of safety and empowerment she had never associated with her new role as a bride. Samuel's actions, every gentle touch, every patient gesture, every look of quiet understanding, were acts of defiance against a world that demanded compliance over consent, endurance over comfort. He was rewriting the rules, proving that strength could coexist with tenderness, that masculinity did not require domination, and that intimacy could be a shared, mutually respectful exploration rather than an assertion of power. The hours slipped by, measured by the deepening shadows and the faint glow of moonlight on the floorboards. Clara felt herself relax in ways she had never known, the tight coil of fear slowly unwinding under Samuel's careful attention. There was no rush, no pressure, only a steady, deliberate building of connection. A sacred acknowledgement that the night, her first night as a wife, could be something more than duty, something more than fear. It could be the first step into a life where she was not merely an object of ownership, but a partner, a human being whose feelings mattered. By the time dawn approached, the farmhouse was silent except for the faint crackle of the dying embers in the hearth. Clara sat beside Samuel, hands lightly touching, both aware of the profound shift that had occurred overnight. No words were necessary to acknowledge the unspoken truth. The frontier rules which dictated cold obedience and rigid hierarchy had been broken. In their place was a new law born of respect, trust, and gentle courage. Samuel had demonstrated that love and care could exist even in a harsh, unforgiving world, and Clara felt herself changed, strengthened by the experience. She was no longer just a 19-year-old girl thrust into marriage. She was a woman who had witnessed tenderness where brutality was expected, who had been seen and valued in a way that defied every expectation. The sun's first rays crept over the horizon, spilling golden light into the room, illuminating the small, quiet smiles on both their faces. The night had been transformative, not in the ways Clara had feared, but in ways she could scarcely have imagined. The frontier might still demand resilience, labor, and survival, but within the walls of that modest farmhouse, a new understanding had been forged. That courage could be gentle, that strength could be kind, and that even on the rugged edge of civilization, love could be something more than a harsh transaction. Clara realized as she rose from the chair, brushing a stray curl from her forehead, that she had crossed an invisible threshold. She was no longer defined solely by the expectations thrust upon her by society, family, or tradition. She had stepped into a new reality, one in which intimacy, trust, and mutual respect were not luxuries but necessities. And in that quiet dawn, she understood that this first night was not merely the beginning of a marriage. It was the first chapter in a life where rules could be challenged, boundaries honored, and love defined by courage, respect, and tenderness even in the unforgiving heart of the frontier. The morning after that transformative first night dawned with a soft golden light spilling across the endless prairie. Clara awoke to the gentle sounds of life on the farm, the lowing of cattle in the distant pasture, the chirping of sparrows perched on the wooden fence, and the faint, comforting crackle of the hearth still warm from last night's fire. The simplicity of it, the quiet rhythm of everyday survival, struck her in a way that was both grounding and overwhelming. The previous night's experiences lingered like a delicate thread woven through her thoughts, a reminder that she had survived, that she had been seen, and that the world of frontier hardship need not crush the soul entirely. Samuel was already awake, kneeling by the fireplace, tending to the coals with careful, deliberate movements. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the sinewy strength in his arms, and his hands, though roughened by labor, moved with a quiet precision as he prepared a modest breakfast of eggs, bread, and freshly churned butter. Clara watched him from the doorway, her heart swelling with a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something that edged toward affection. She realized, almost with surprise, that she was beginning to feel comfortable in this life, not merely resigned to it, but genuinely at home, buoyed by the knowledge that her husband's care and respect for her extended beyond mere appearances. Breakfast was a quiet affair, the two of them sharing the small table in the corner of the farmhouse kitchen. Conversation flowed cautiously at first, tentative words exploring the contours of familiarity. Samuel asked her about her favorite foods, about the chores she had known before arriving, and even about her dreams, however fleeting or fantastical they might have been. Clara felt a warm glow of gratitude at his attentiveness. He did not lecture her, nor did he assume knowledge of her needs. He simply listened, a patient presence that seemed almost revolutionary in a world where women were often told to endure and obey without question. The quiet intimacy of shared meals and mutual attention created a space where Clara felt her autonomy and her voice acknowledged, for the first time since leaving her family home. The chores of the farm began shortly after breakfast. Clara, inexperienced in laboring on the land, approached the tasks with hesitance and a quiet determination. Samuel, ever patient, guided her through the routines, fetching water from the well, tending to the chickens, and gathering firewood for the hearth. He did not criticize her fumbling hands or uneven technique. Instead, he demonstrated, encouraged, and allowed her the dignity of learning at her own pace. Each interaction, each moment of instruction was imbued with respect and care. Clara began to understand that Samuel's strength was not merely physical, nor was his authority grounded in dominance. Rather, it lay in his steadiness, his patience, and his unwavering commitment to creating an environment where mistakes could be corrected without shame, and growth was encouraged rather than punished. As the day wore on, Clara began to notice subtler qualities in her husband that deepened her admiration. He had a meticulous way of observing the land, noting the subtle changes in soil, weather, and livestock behavior with a keen, intuitive understanding. He moved with a rhythm that seemed inseparable from the natural world, as if he were an extension of the farm itself. Clara felt a strange comfort in this presence, a sense that Samuel was not merely guiding her through chores but subtly teaching her the art of survival with dignity. There was a lesson in every gesture, in the way he coaxed a frightened calf closer, in the patience with which he repaired a broken fence, in the quiet acknowledgement of the small victories that punctuated each day. The growing trust between them was not forged in grand declarations, but in the quiet, persistent rhythm of daily life. Clara discovered that the simplest tasks, carrying water, tending the animals, preparing meals, became shared experiences that drew them closer. Samuel did not hurry her, nor did he seek to assert his dominance over her labor. Instead, he celebrated her successes, offered gentle correction when needed, and created a sense of partnership that Clara had never before known possible. In the back of her mind, she marveled at the quiet rebellion this represented against the conventional expectations of the frontier, where a wife's labor was often exploited and her voice disregarded. Here in this small farmhouse, she felt acknowledged, valued, and gradually, a fledgling sense of affection began to blossom. By the afternoon, as the sun climbed high into the sky, the physical exertion of the chores left them both tired but fulfilled. Clara found herself laughing at minor mishaps, spilled water, a runaway chicken, a stubborn sack of grain, finding joy in the shared absurdities of farm life. Samuel laughed too, not with ridicule but with warmth, a sound that seemed to echo across the open fields like a balm against the isolation of the frontier. Their laughter became a bridge, linking the distance between two strangers forced into intimacy by circumstance, allowing them to discover a rhythm of companionship that went beyond necessity into genuine connection. As evening approached, Samuel guided Clara to the edge of the fields, showing her the small, thriving garden that had taken years of care to cultivate. He spoke of the cycles of planting and harvest, of the patience required to coax life from stubborn soil, and Clara felt herself drawing parallels between tending the land and nurturing their fledgling relationship. Both required patience, attention, and a willingness to accept imperfection. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the fruits of his labor and the soft hum of nature settling into twilight, Clara felt an unexpected surge of admiration, respect, and even affection for the man she had been so uncertain about only days ago. The evening meal was another simple affair, yet the comfort of routine and the growing intimacy between them made it feel sacred. Samuel continued to speak gently, asking her thoughts on the day's work, listening to her observations, and encouraging her to share her feelings and ideas. Clara marveled at the ease with which he accepted her voice, validating her opinions, and allowing her the dignity of being an equal participant in their small world. By this point, she realized that the bond forming between them was not born of obligation or necessity alone, but of mutual respect, trust, and the quiet understanding that they could rely on one another in a life defined by hard work and unpredictability. Night fell again, and with it came the shadows and quiet that mirrored the previous evening. Clara prepared for bed, but this time there was no fear, no tension in her body. Samuel joined her once more, his presence calm and reassuring, yet respectful of her autonomy. They sat together, speaking softly about the day's successes and challenges, sharing small gestures of affection, a gentle touch on her hand, a brush of his knuckles against hers. Clara realized that trust, cultivated in the quiet, relentless rhythm of labor and attentiveness, could be even more intimate than the passionate intensity of a single night. She felt her heart swelling with gratitude and a cautious affection that had begun to replace the uncertainty and fear she had brought with her from the town. By the end of the third day, Clara understood that life on the frontier, though harsh and demanding, could be tempered by kindness, patience, and respect. Samuel had shown her that strength need not be harsh, that authority could coexist with tenderness, and that trust was something built incrementally through shared experience rather than demanded by decree. She felt her own confidence growing, not only in her ability to manage the farm but in her capacity to navigate the complexities of human connection and intimacy. In these first days, she had witnessed the transformation of a stranger into a partner, a man into someone worthy of trust, and a home into a place where she could finally belong. The quiet night stretched across the prairie once more, the wind whispering through the grass, the distant cries of animals punctuating the stillness. Clara lay beside Samuel, the warmth of the hearth and their shared presence wrapping around her like a protective blanket. She reflected on the days behind them and the unknown future ahead, knowing that the foundation of trust, care, and mutual respect they had built would guide them through the challenges of frontier life. For the first time since leaving her parents' home, she felt a sense of hope and belonging, understanding that love, in its quiet, patient form, could flourish even in the rugged, unforgiving world of the frontier. The morning air was crisp, carrying the sharp tang of earth and hay as Clara stepped out of the farmhouse. The sun had just begun to cast pale streaks across the prairie, illuminating the farmhouse and the sprawling fields that Samuel had worked tirelessly to cultivate. At first, the day seemed like any other. The animals lowed in the distance, the wind stirred the tall grasses, and the promise of routine hung in the air. But Clara sensed a subtle tension that the tranquility could not mask. Samuel was already outside, moving among the livestock with a careful, watchful eye, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was an unspoken gravity in his demeanor, a quiet alertness that immediately drew her attention. Something was different, something urgent. Before Clara could speak, Samuel gestured toward the barn. She followed, feeling the familiar flutter of nervousness mingled with curiosity. As they approached, the source of tension became apparent. The barn's main door was ajar, the latch broken, and the smell of smoke lingered faintly in the air. One of the horses had panicked during the night and kicked over a lantern, leaving a small fire smoldering among the hay bales. Clara's heart skipped a beat as she realized the danger. The barn could have burned entirely, consuming not only their livelihood but potentially their safety as well. The stark reality of frontier life pressed down on her in an instant, reminding her that comfort and security were fragile luxuries in this harsh world. Samuel acted swiftly but with measured calm. He barked a command to the animals, guiding them to safer areas, while Clara instinctively grabbed a bucket of water from the well. She moved alongside him, aware of every movement, her hands trembling slightly but determined to contribute. Samuel's presence was a stabilizing force, his steady instructions and confident handling of the animals giving her courage. She realized as she worked to douse the smoldering hay that trust was not simply a matter of emotional connection. It was tested in moments of crisis, in the shared exertion, and in the unspoken understanding that each relied upon the other for survival. The hours that followed were grueling. The fire had been contained before it spread to the entire barn, but the damage was substantial. Hay bales were charred, one horse had injured a leg, and tools had been displaced or ruined. Clara felt the weight of exhaustion settling in her bones, yet she pushed herself alongside Samuel, finding rhythm and purpose in the shared labor. Every action required coordination and mutual reliance, lifting, dragging, and repairing together. In the sweat of their work, Clara discovered a profound truth about her husband. His strength was not merely physical. It was a combination of patience, strategy, and deep emotional awareness. He recognized her limits and guided her without patronizing, encouraged her without pressure, and praised her efforts without exaggeration. This was a man who understood the delicate balance of survival and care, the harmony between resilience and compassion. As the day wore on, Clara began to notice the quiet ways Samuel tended not only to the animals and property, but to her as well. He noticed when she faltered, when fatigue etched lines on her face, and he offered relief without question, allowing her moments to rest while he took on the heavier burdens. When one of the horses resisted being led, Samuel calmly intervened, his hands gentle yet firm, demonstrating the importance of composure and empathy in moments of high stress. Clara was struck by how instinctively he had learned to preserve dignity even in chaos, how his actions conveyed a message that she was not only capable but worthy of partnership, even when circumstances were dire. By late afternoon, the sun had climbed high, illuminating the barn and surrounding fields in a harsh light that revealed the extent of the work still required. Clara's muscles ached. Her hands were raw from handling buckets and tools. Yet there was a quiet exhilaration in the shared accomplishment. Samuel paused, resting a hand on her shoulder, his gaze meeting hers with a mixture of pride and reassurance. "You did well today," he said softly, the words carrying more weight than any praise she had received before. "We faced it together." In that simple acknowledgement, Clara felt the full impact of their growing bond. Trust, she realized, was not built in calm moments alone. It was forged in adversity, in the sweat and struggle, in the unflinching reliance on one another to face challenges and emerge intact. Evening brought with it a tired, aching relief. The barn had been repaired as best as possible, the injured horse stabilized and tools organized once more. Clara leaned against the doorway, catching her breath, as Samuel prepared a modest meal over the fire. The quiet domesticity of the task felt comforting after the chaos of the day. As they ate together, Clara reflected on the stark contrast between the dangers and the serenity of frontier life. The farm demanded vigilance and hard work, yet within the shared effort lay the potential for deep connection and understanding. Samuel's unwavering support had transformed fear into confidence, uncertainty into trust, and isolation into companionship. Later, as night descended, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge one by one against the velvet darkness. The events of the day weighed heavily on both of them, yet there was a shared sense of accomplishment and resilience. Clara felt the boundaries between them shift subtly, the shared labor and mutual reliance creating a foundation stronger than any promise of marriage alone. They spoke quietly, exchanging reflections on the day, discussing plans to prevent similar incidents, and sharing small, candid thoughts about their lives before the farm. Clara realized that these moments, the discussions, the laughter amidst hardship, the silent recognition of shared burdens, were just as vital to their bond as any tender gestures or whispered intimacies of the night before. The crisis had revealed the depth of Samuel's character in ways that words alone could not convey. He had acted decisively without domination, guided her without condescension, and protected her without claiming superiority. In the face of danger, he had demonstrated the principles that would define their partnership: mutual respect, trust, patience, and unwavering commitment. Clara felt her admiration for him deepen, entwined with a burgeoning affection that had grown steadily since their first night. She recognized that true intimacy was built not merely on physical closeness, but on the shared experience of facing life's challenges together, relying on one another and emerging stronger and more connected on the other side. By the time they retired for the night, exhaustion had claimed them both, yet their hearts were lightened by the reassurance that they could navigate adversity together. Clara lay in bed feeling the comforting presence of Samuel beside her, and reflected on how much the events of a single day could transform perception, build trust, and solidify bonds. The harshness of the frontier had not diminished her spirit. Instead, it had illuminated the resilience, patience, and care inherent in her husband. She drifted to sleep with a sense of security she had never known before, a quiet conviction that, despite the challenges that lay ahead, they would face each one together. As the stars twinkled over the prairie, Clara understood a profound truth. Love on the frontier was not simply a matter of passion or social expectation. It was an ongoing practice of respect, courage, and shared labor. Each day, each trial, each tender moment contributed to a tapestry of trust that bound them together far more effectively than any decree of tradition or expectation. In this crucible of hardship and companionship, Clara and Samuel had forged not only a household, but a partnership grounded in empathy, resilience, and deep human connection, a bond capable of withstanding the unpredictable trials of frontier life. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, as if nature itself was celebrating a new beginning. Clara stepped outside the farmhouse, her bare feet brushing against the cool morning grass, and felt a sense of calm she had never known before. The trials of the past days, the uncertainty of her arranged marriage, the fears of the first night, and the chaos of the barn fire had left her exhausted, yet they had also forged something deeper within her, a trust in Samuel, a faith in their partnership, and a quiet certainty that life together on the frontier could be not just bearable, but rich, purposeful, and even joyful. Samuel was already in the fields, inspecting the crops and the livestock with his usual careful attention. His presence, once intimidating in its quiet strength, now felt like a comforting anchor in the ever-shifting landscape of frontier life. Clara watched him for a moment, marveling at the ease and confidence with which he moved, the way he seemed attuned to every detail of the land and its creatures. And yet what struck her most was the gentle way he regarded her. Even across the distance, a subtle nod, a quiet smile, a recognition that she was not only his wife but his equal in curiosity, courage, and resolve. Clara felt a flutter in her chest, a warm affirmation that the emotional intimacy they had begun to build was blossoming into something enduring and profound. The morning was devoted to repairing the barn more thoroughly, reinforcing beams and reorganizing tools to prevent another disaster. Clara worked alongside Samuel with newfound confidence, her hands steady, her movements precise. She realized that the challenges of frontier life were no longer intimidating in the same way. They were opportunities to demonstrate resilience, to contribute meaningfully, and to deepen the bond between them. Samuel offered guidance and assistance as always, but never overstepped, allowing Clara the dignity of independence while fostering a sense of partnership that was both empowering and intimate. Their laughter occasionally punctuated the labor, a shared language of triumph over adversity that spoke volumes of the connection forming between them. By midday, the repairs were complete, and a sense of satisfaction settled over them both. Samuel paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and turned to Clara with a gentle smile. "We make a good team," he said quietly, his voice carrying the warmth of acknowledgement and admiration. Clara felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of pride and affection as she realized that this simple statement encapsulated the essence of their growing relationship: trust, respect, and collaboration. The frontier, which had once seemed like a realm of hardship and isolation, now appeared as a landscape ripe with possibility, a canvas upon which they could build a shared life, defined not by fear or obligation but by mutual care, understanding, and love. The afternoon brought them to the small garden Samuel had cultivated with meticulous care. Clara knelt beside him, tending to the vegetables and herbs, her hands sinking into the rich soil. Samuel leaned close, offering advice, his touch light yet reassuring as he guided her movements. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of patient labor, Clara felt the depth of her connection with him. She realized that love on the frontier was not a sudden spark, but a slow, deliberate cultivation. Much like the crops they nurtured together, every gesture, every shared task, every quiet moment of guidance and support added layer upon layer to the trust and affection between them. Evening approached with a tranquil hush, the sky painted in soft purples and pinks. Clara and Samuel sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The events of the past days, fear, labor, crises, and tender nights, had coalesced into a profound understanding. They no longer needed words to express the bond that had formed. It was evident in the ease of their proximity, the quiet gestures of care and the comfortable silence that now filled the spaces between them. Clara rested her head lightly on Samuel's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a grounding force that reassured her of her place not just as his wife, but as his partner and confidant. As darkness fell, the stars emerged, scattered across the sky like glittering reminders of the vastness and beauty of the world they inhabited. The night carried a sense of promise, of peace, and of the enduring power of connection, forged through shared trials and tender moments. Samuel spoke softly, reflecting on the days past and the challenges they had overcome. "We've faced much together already," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "And yet I feel we've only just begun." Clara's heart swelled with hope, recognizing in his words not just a promise of safety and stability, but the anticipation of a life shared fully with all its hardships, joys, and small victories. They prepared for bed with a quiet intimacy that had evolved naturally over the past days. Clara no longer felt the apprehension she had experienced on their first night. Instead, she felt a profound sense of safety and belonging. Samuel's touch was familiar, comforting, and respectful, a continuation of the gentle lessons of patience, trust, and care that had guided their early days together. In the quiet darkness of their modest bedroom, they held hands, shared a few whispered words of affection, and acknowledged silently the extraordinary bond that had grown between them, one that could weather not only the hardships of frontier life, but the deeper, more subtle challenges of human emotion and connection. The weeks that followed unfolded in a rhythm of labor, shared meals, and tender, quiet moments. Clara and Samuel continued to navigate the demands of the farm. Yet each challenge was now an opportunity to reinforce their partnership. Storms that might have once brought fear were now faced with confidence and collaboration. Tasks that seemed daunting became opportunities for laughter, cooperation, and mutual appreciation. Clara discovered a strength within herself she had never known, nurtured by Samuel's steady guidance and the affirmation of her capabilities. Their love deepened not in dramatic gestures, but in the accumulation of countless small acts of trust, patience, and care, a tapestry woven from the threads of daily life and shared experience. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel reached for Clara's hand, holding it gently. "I promise," he said, "that no matter what the future holds, we will face it together." The simplicity of the words belied their profound significance. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, not of sorrow, but of gratitude and joy. Here in the quiet embrace of the frontier, amid the dust, the wind, and the endless sky, she had found something rare and precious, a partnership grounded in respect, affection, and unwavering trust. It was a love that had emerged not in spite of the harshness of their world, but because of it, a love tempered by challenges, strengthened by trials, and nurtured by the consistent care and attention they offered each other. As the fire died down, Clara and Samuel prepared for rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring more labor, more challenges, and more moments of quiet triumph. Yet they faced it with a sense of assurance and unity. The past days had shown them that the world might be unpredictable, that hardships were inevitable, and that the frontier could be both beautiful and unforgiving. And yet, within the safety of their bond, they had discovered a resilience that could endure storms, fires, and the isolation of the land. In each other, they had found not only companionship but a source of strength, a mirror reflecting courage, patience, and the quiet promise of love. As Clara drifted into sleep, she reflected on the journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty, and had evolved into trust, affection, and hope. The frontier, once a place of harsh necessity, had become a space where connection could flourish, where partnership could be genuine, and where love could be cultivated deliberately with care and intention. Samuel's unwavering presence, his patient guidance, and his respect for her autonomy had transformed her understanding of marriage, intimacy, and resilience. In this new life, Clara realized, they would face hardships and triumphs alike, but always together, bound by trust, strengthened by shared labor, and united by a love that defied the rigid rules of the frontier while honoring its demands. The prairie stretched beyond their farmhouse, vast and untamed, yet no longer intimidating. Clara and Samuel had learned to navigate its challenges side by side, and in the quiet of the night, with stars overhead and the wind whispering through the fields, they knew that together they could build not just a home but a life rich with trust, affection, and enduring partnership, a life where the rules of the frontier were tempered by love, patience, and respect, and where the promise of the future glowed as brightly as the morning sun over the endless plains.